We have fresh numbers in, giving us a peek into the largest housing market in this country. That would be Toronto. Definitely found its footing last year after a pullback, and now we're in a situation where we have tight supply and rising prices. The average price is now up 12% year over year. John Pasalis is the president of Realosophy Realty, joins us now to weigh in. Great to see you, John.
Good to be here.
All right, the last time I was able to ask the Bank of Canada Governor Stephen Pasalis some questions about housing was just a couple of weeks ago, and he basically said they are keeping a careful eye. They're worried about froth returning to the market. As I look at these numbers, do we need to be concerned? Is there froth out there? Are we starting to get speculative again?
Yeah, I mean, I think there is some reason to be concerned. I think when you talk to realtors, when you look at what's going on the ground, I think there are a lot of people comparing it to what we saw in 2017. I mean, especially I'm finding this year, we're seeing that type of mood in the condo market more so than in the low-rise segment. And it's a combination of investors jumping in and a lot of anxiety among buyers, just feeling like they need to buy a condo now or they're never going to be able to afford one. And we're seeing really, really rapid increases in prices. I mean, condos selling for 10 to 15% more than what similar units sold for 6-9 months ago.
Now, that seems to be a potent combination when you talk about froth. You have investors moving into the space, and then you have basically people saying, well, if I don't buy now, I'll never be able to afford to buy it. Basically, the fear of missing it. You put those two things together, and you could, I guess, have a 2017 all over again.
Yeah, and I think that's the huge risk, and that's 100% what we're seeing. I mean, we're seeing really, really strong investor demand, and that's part of the reason why there's not a lot of inventory of condos. I mean, a lot of people who own them are just holding on to them as an investment. And you have this really, really sort of anxious home buyer who's trying to get into the market. The only thing they can afford is a condo, and those prices just keep going up. So it's definitely something we need to keep a close eye on.
Now, I can understand that tightness in the condo market in terms of it takes a while to build a condo building, but overall active listings. We got into this situation, too, when Toronto was running extremely high. And then we were talking about price appreciation of like 28% year over year in certain segments, but people weren't listing their homes. I mean, what's the dynamic there? The market gets hot and people don't want to put their home on the market.
It's a great question, and we've kind of been diving into the data to understand this. I mean, one of the common theories that's circulated out there is that people aren't upsizing. And when we look at the data, I think it has less to do with that. I mean, if you look at detached home sales, they're up over 23%. So people are upsizing. What's happening is they're just not selling their properties is what we're starting to see. So a disproportionate increase in the rentals that have been going on the market over the past 6 months are from people who have had condos or had houses and are just holding on to them and putting into the rental market.
Now, one thing that we are anticipating out of the federal government, I mean, there was a lot of regulatory changes, a lot of rules came in, stress tests, and that definitely had a downward effect on the market. Seems that we have well digested all that stuff, particularly in Toronto, and have moved on. So now, as we head into the spring budget, we're wondering, Minister Morneau, he was given that mandate from his boss, the Prime Minister. Why don't you take a look at the stress test? Why don't you make it a little more dynamic?
Yeah.
We're not exactly sure what dynamic means, but if dynamic means easier to pass that bar, are we really going to throw some gasoline on this fire?
Well, I mean, I think the one thing that we have heard them consider doing is not make the Bank of Canada's 5-year rate sort of the benchmark, and really just have it, at 2% or 200 basis points higher than the rate that the buyers will be paying. So that's not going to add a lot of fuel. I mean, it's not going to really increase demand too much. I mean, of course, if they decide to sort of put in some regional differences, so maybe in areas like the prairies, they sort of ease up on the stress test, that might help a little bit those markets. But I can't see them doing anything that'll fuel demand in primary markets like Toronto and Vancouver.
Now, for the longest time, after the cool down, when I started to take a look at the numbers every month that come out from TREB, or there's 2 R's in there now, I'm not sure how we're supposed to say it, Toronto Regional Real Estate Board, anyway, bad real estate humor. We saw the movement in condo prices. It made sense. People are getting pushed down to the lower end of the market. That's where they could afford to get in, when they're getting stress tested, got knocked out of the single-family home. But even detached homes now in the 416, the city proper, those prices up 17%. That really caught my eye. I mean, for the longest while, they were flat.
Yeah. Really interesting to see. I mean, both a strong demand for detached homes. Again, in both in 905 and Toronto, they're up over 20%, and that's like the biggest sort of increase in sales out of all the house types. And also, you're right, very interesting to see 17% increase in detached home prices in Toronto. So, people have the means to upsize. They are upsizing. And I do think that's part of what's driving this kind of big increase in detached home sales in the GTA.
I know part of your previous analysis when we were trying to figure out the previous Toronto bubble before things cooled dramatically was that speculative behavior, and you honed into a little north of the city, that Markham, that Vaughan region, and that seemed to be the biggest, sort of the epicenter. Yeah. Are you noticing pockets of the city now where people are favoring more for that speculative kind of mindset?
I wouldn't say this time around. It's probably not pockets of the city. It's the type of property, and we're seeing it more for condominiums. And again, there's big increase for new investors, existing owners of keeping their condominiums, just diving in and renting them. And one of the risks that we're finding right now is we're seeing a really, really big increase in the inventory of rentals. Rentals, if we look at just condo rentals year over year for January, those inventories are up over 50%. So that market's softening just as investors are rushing in.
Now, what are the risks here if things really get out of control? The average price up 12% year over year. That's a little hotter than I guess a lot of economists have suggested to me in a regular functioning market. Maybe you see 5 to 7, 8% year over year. So we're a little bit hotter than that right now. If we start getting into the high teens, back into the 20s in terms of 20% appreciation, do we have to think that perhaps the federal government will step in again? They did it before.
Well, we're already in the teens for the condo market. So there's definitely a lot of risk that the momentum is just going to keep going that way, and we have to keep a close eye on where they're going in the near term.
What does it mean for a health of the market, though? Because that was, you and I have had these discussions, and others. People might think, oh, anyone in the real estate industry loves it when prices are going up 28%, 30%, that they're just raking in the cash. But I guess you have to start worrying if you're a thoughtful member of the real estate profession that the hotter things get, the worse it could be down there on the other side.
Yeah, I mean, most people in my industry don't want to see 15 to 20% price gains. It's not healthy. It's not balanced. It's a difficult market to work in. It's difficult for buyers. So it's problematic to see, price increases in the mid to high teens. So I don't know what the government's going to do. It's really difficult to kind of manage sort of these next steps. I mean, they've tightened credit. They put in the stress tests. I mean, how do you slow down this momentum, especially when it's driven by investor attitudes and investor demand, which is what it looks like is at least to part of it. So it's going to be really difficult. So how to mitigate these risks in the future?
Yeah, it seems that TD moving on its 5-year posted rate. I believe it was TD earlier this week, and there's some suggestion that maybe OSFI gave the big banks a little bit of a nudge, like, come on, there's a stress test or the posted rate of the Bank of Canada, and you guys are being pretty stubborn with your posted rates. So maybe a little leaning there, as you were saying earlier. Maybe that's the thing you decouple from. And in the meantime, the banking regulator seems to say, why don't you bring it down a little bit?
Yeah, exactly. And we did see that. And I think that's kind of the changes we were expecting to see OSFI to make. And perhaps they're just sort of nudging the banks in this direction without needing to sort of, put in major changes into the stress tests.
Interesting stuff, John. Thanks as always for joining us.
Good to be here.
John Pasalis is the president of Realosophy Realty.